see it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of the Day of Action. I want to make sure that you all are keeping abreast of not only what we're saying here and sharing, but checking into the chat as well. We've got some opportunities for you to communicate with us and give us questions. So definitely use the Q&A function for that. And then we're tracking the chat because we have some social media opportunities as well. So you can share your voice at the same time as we're in this and be continuing the conversation for later. As a part of my introduction, I think it's important that you not only know my name, Robert Franklin II. It's important to me that you know I use the he, him, his pronoun series, and I identify as a Black man who was raised in Colorado and here in the United States. And I identify with my gender expression the way that you probably see it as well. So in Colorado, I serve at the Public Health Association as the health equity officer. I also work in a pediatric health system here in Colorado. And my passion and training has been in helping people understand how differences make a difference and impact the work that we do. And so you'll see a little bit of that today. And so I'm just honored to have the opportunity to share the space with Jason, who will introduce himself in just a minute. And certainly a big, huge thanks to our partners who will introduce as we go on. You see the agenda on the screen, hopefully. And so we're going to begin. We're already beginning with introductions, and I'm going to pass it to Jason to introduce himself and to our association and work. Jason.
Thank you, Robert. My name is Jason Botello. I also use he, him, his pronouns. I am the Behavioral Health Coordinator at the Public Health Institute at Denver Health, and I am also the president of the Colorado Public Health Association. Shout out to CPHA members and officers who are joining us, as well as members and leaders of the Health Equity Coalition. Also shout out to members of the Community Leadership Team, the Public Health, Public Safety Community Leadership Team, who are also affiliated with the Public Health Institute at Denver Health. I wanted to take just a moment to set the table a bit and provide a bit of the context as to why we are here. The past 18 months plus have really illuminated the enduring legacy and impacts of racism within our society. We've seen more egregious episodes of police violence. We've seen a lot of mass protests and organized advocacy efforts to make some changes. We've seen a lot of proclamations from APHA to state and local public health departments declaring racism public health issue or crisis. And we've also seen growing attention around the overutilization and over-reliance upon the criminal legal system as the primary entity addressing concerns such as homelessness, mental illness, substance use and addiction, and poverty. We believe that these are public health matters and that they cannot be understood, let alone resolved through a public safety framework alone. Denver, Colorado, and Colorado itself has been a national leader in efforts to more comprehensively and holistically solve these problems through public health, community engagement, systems coordination, policy advocacy, and direct action. For our part, the Colorado Public Health Association has committed itself to becoming an anti-racist organization. We've hired a consultant to assist in this process through the provision of education to our board, as well as our members, SWOT analyses, and ultimately a shift in the way we govern, the way we communicate, run elections, and make decisions. We also want to use our platform to elevate the work of community partners engaged in direct action on the front lines. And while there are no doubt many organizations, individuals, and initiatives across Colorado that are doing this work very effectively, we will be featuring just three of those champions this afternoon. And we're gonna start, these are our speakers. I'll be providing the bio for Wendy and Dr. Davis here in a bit, but we're gonna start with Vinny Cervantes and Dasha. And I'll pass it back to Robert.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, a huge thank you to our partners at the beginning. And thank you not only for being here, but just for sharing the stories and experiences and expertise that is going to be very important for us when we're talking about public health for public safety. So if you haven't done already, make sure that you're checking in the chat for our hashtag public health for public safety, as well as connecting to the organizations you're going to hear more about here very shortly. So because we are doing this in a virtual environment, one of our intentions was to make sure that you saw where you would have been for this particular convention, the conference, APHA 2021. And we were going to take you on a tour, literally through the streets of Denver, to see what might be real about public health for public safety. Doing that in a virtual world adds some challenges and changes. And so we did a video tour, and we went with one of our partners, Dasher, who you're going to hear about in a moment. And so we shot a video of the work happening on a particular Sunday in our streets, and we would have done that with you, but instead you're going to get it through the wonders of the internet. Now, because I am in a space that is not my own, I don't know what the bandwidth is going to be. So we're going to do our best to show you a video and give you some an interactive opportunity to see what was going on, to hear what was going on. It may be a little choppy, but I think you'll get the gist of it. There is sound. At the beginning, there isn't, because what we were hoping that you'll start to do is start to get into the mode of being there in the space. So as you're looking and listening to the video, trust there will be sound, and our moderators are going to help us make sure that the technical difficulties are minimized. But what I want you to be thinking about as you're watching this video are, let's say, 3 or 4 things. And definitely take time to add into the chat your responses to these. So what do you notice about our streets here in the Denver metro area, given the video that you're seeing? What questions come up for you as you see our street team in action, the Dasher Street team in action? And then when you're thinking about sharing the stories of others, which is so powerful to the public health practice, how can we avoid tokenization? And you'll see why that's an important piece as we're talking about decriminalizing homelessness here in just a second. So those are the 3 questions that we're going to put into the chat. We want you thinking about, and feel free to chat as long as you go. This is a 9-minute video. It does include sound and video as well. And so we challenge you to stay here, stay connected as you're watching it. So I'm going to go off a video and share and definitely say thank you to Dasher and to Vinny Cervantes, who you're going to hear from in just a moment, for making this video possible. So bear with me as I get that started.
Why are you here? Why are you doing this work?
Feels like the right thing to be doing right now. With the housing issues that are going on, and more and more people on the street and being evicted and all that.
It's the right thing to do, huh?
To Civic Center Park, middle of Denver, again, right across from the Capitol, also next to the City and County Building of Denver. They closed Civic Center Park a few weeks ago, actually about a month ago, and they did so because they claimed it was a health hazard, that unhoused folks were in this area, unsheltered folks were in this area. They claimed it was a safety hazard, it was a health hazard. They've completely shut down the park, which to my knowledge is unprecedented. Now, ironically, they're going to reopen the park right in front of a big event that they're having here called the Chris Kindle Market. But they completely shut down the park, citing homelessness as the reason. And the amazing thing is that the director of parks in Denver, they said that they did this because most people have been pushed out of the Capitol neighborhood into this area, into the concentrated issues, and yet they continue that practice of pushing people around, displacing people, and in this case, pushing people out of the park into the neighborhoods again. And so it's a cyclical thing that they're doing of displacing people, moving them around the city, and then trashing their belongings along the way, and then shutting off spaces like this, which is one of Denver's main kind of center areas, attractions and parks. And again, they're doing it from a perspective of public health and safety hazard or public health or safety reasons. And what they're going to do after they reopen this park is to have more of an intent to criminalize and punish people who are unhoused, unsheltered, and they've mentioned they're going to have a bigger focus on criminalizing and punishing people who are service providers who are supporting those folks because they claim that by having a concentration of services or support like food and water, that attracts more unsheltered folks to the area. And so they don't want to do that. And they also are claiming that nonprofits and service providers are leaving all this trash behind. And that's not really the case. We don't leave trash behind for the most part. The partners that we work with don't leave trash behind. In fact, we've done more work than arguably the city to clean up trash in the city. But in this case, there's way more trash created by events like the Chris Kindle Market, like the Taste of Colorado, like the Colfax Marathon. But that's not nearly the priority versus people that are just trying to survive in this area, especially when the city of Denver has the resources to do trash cleanup, to do things like set up porta potties to navigate human waste, to do needle cleanups, because there's plenty of organizations that are willing to do that. But the city of Denver would rather invest resources in criminalizing people than supporting folks who are struggling. And this is the greatest, probably visual example of that, is closing down such a huge area with the intent to chase out unhoused folks, unsheltered folks, and follow that up with policies that further criminalize them. And this is because the city knows that as they displace unhoused folks, that about 70% of the time unhoused folks go back to where they were displaced from. And so the city, knowing that, wants to prevent folks from going back there. So the city, knowing that most people who are displaced, and that they go back to where they were, have erected fencing across the entire city. That is this orange fencing that prevents people from going back. And it's all across Denver. And this is really harmful. It's deliberate planning to make sure that people aren't able to just do some basic things to survive. In this case, setting up a tent, laying down, sleeping for the night, sleeping for the day if they need to. And this is just one of many ways that the city deliberately prevents people from just trying to survive, especially those who are unsheltered, unhoused folks.
Ask me, why are you volunteering? Why are you doing it?
Simply because it matters to me. Simply because it aligns with my politics. I would like to do more things that we have.
You just had a bus. Say that again. You'd like to be more what?
Things that actually align with my politics. Obviously I have pretty far left beliefs. Just be the one, I guess. And then I'd like to actually do more to work with people who are either actively or potentially political allies in my actual community,
Mm-hmm.
We also have Gatorade if y'all want Gatorade. Oh, yeah, and Gatorade. Okay, well, blue or white?
You said Gatorade. You got blue. Fruit snacks. Oh, no, I want a fruit snack. You just said
I've also got some cookies. Melissa, come here. Melissa, come here.
This building in front of us, luxury apartment buildings that are not fully filled, and this is the priority that Denver has on development. And they weren't paying their workers, and so a group called Towards Justice sued them because they weren't paying their workers, and they won that lawsuit. And so they had to back pay all the people that they had not paid to build this incredible high-end luxury apartment building that, again, is not fully filled. And so apartment buildings like this they'll deliberately keep those apartments not filled so they can maintain the prices for them, which is thousands of dollars per month, instead of fill them and bring their prices down so they can just maintain the high cost of living in that building. And this is happening all across Denver, where we have empty buildings that still have yet to be filled, and meanwhile we have thousands of people on our streets. And in this case, some of the development practices are deliberately not paying or underpaying their workers to build these incredible buildings that, again, are still not even fully filled.
Yes. So what you're saying is that literally what we're doing out here today, what you're doing, is against public policy and what the city is trying to legislate.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, we are directly engaging with unhoused, unsheltered folks. We're engaging with businesses to talk about using alternatives to police. But in distributing food and water, we are breaking a law in the city of Denver called the Urban Camping Ban that they usually use to criminalize unhoused, unsheltered folks and other people in the city that support them. And so we are directly violating the law. We are also going against what the city of Denver would prefer when it comes to engaging unhoused folks, because they believe by supporting people that we attract more people to us. We attract more people in the city of Denver, the concentrated locations, and they don't want that. They want to hide homelessness. They want to chase people out of the area or coerce them into services that may not actually be the best solution for them. In this case, our shelters, which are not always open. There's not enough shelter beds. There's also not shelters that are welcoming, that are accessible, that are safe for a lot of folks, that are healthy for folks. And so the city of Denver wants to coerce folks into taking those services like a shelter, or otherwise hide them or chase them out of the city, which is creating a bigger problem for cities like Aurora, like Lakewood, where homelessness is being pushed out to those areas where there's not as many services to support those folks.
Got it.
What would be one call to action that you would have for people, not just people in Denver, but people across the country who are in public health? Well, it's one thing you would tell them they should do.
Oh boy. I guess make a point to listen to the people who are affected the most, unhoused people especially, because those are the people that need the most resources right now. So making a point to listen to them. Yeah.
So I want to first begin with thanks to Sadani for editing that video. That was awesome. All I did was point and shoot, and then so Sadani took that in and did a great job so that you could feel a little bit about what it's like to be in our streets here in Denver. And so if you wouldn't mind tossing a thumbs up or a hand clap to Sadani into the chat, I would greatly appreciate that. I want to introduce you to Vinny Cervantes, who was featured in the video, director of Dasher. Vinny, can you tell us, what do you do? What were we watching? And over the next couple of minutes, how does this connect with public health for public safety?
Yeah, so what you were watching, again, my name is Vinny Cervantes, the director of Dasher. I use he, him pronouns. We founded Dasher in 2018 to create support community-based alternatives to policing and jail, including replacing law enforcement in situations of crisis, and as well as other back-end programs like restorative justice, transformative justice. But what you saw on the video was a typical Sunday for us. We go out every Sunday called Street Health Sunday as our event, and we use volunteers to engage with our unhoused community. We distribute food and snacks and use street medics to address any immediate first aid situations. We also talk to businesses about not using the police, and in this case, using the STAR program instead, which I'll talk about a little later. But we've engaged probably close to 300 businesses since we launched Street Health Sunday to talk about using alternatives and not criminalizing our in-house community. And every Sunday is kind of different between what we might see. In this case, we meet in different parts of the city each week, but in this case, we were trying to kind of track down all the people that had been displaced in Civic Center Park. But actually yesterday, we ran into, I would say, at least a dozen encampments that included probably close to 100 people that we had to engage. We also ran into a couple other organizations that were helping with that work as well. So it's a big problem in Denver with criminalizing homelessness, and it's hard to keep track of where folks are being moved and displaced to. And it's something that is directly leading to a loss of life on our streets.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Vinny. We're here at a day of action, and we heard in the video one of your volunteers say that we need to be listening to those who are impacted by the policies that you were talking about. what else can we be doing if we're thinking about public health for public safety?
Yeah, I would offer 3 points of action that we would recommend as Dasher. One being to connect and support your local communities, because we have a lot of folks reaching out to us here in Denver and with Dasher to talk about the STAR program or ask what that program looks like in their respective area. But the first thing we say is who are you talking to locally, because there's probably folks that are doing that work on a local level. So connect with those groups to create non-police models like the STAR program. I don't know if I'll get a chance to talk about that, but because I think it's worth some context to talk about both Cahoots and STAR. But
Yeah, tell us, go ahead, Vinny, tell us more about STAR.
Yeah, if I can, I'm just going to share a graphic just real quick about kind of framing that work and what STAR is. But yeah, so I'll just share my screen just real quick. So Cahoots is what we were inspired by to create Dasher and eventually to create STAR. And Cahoots has been around for over 30 years in Eugene, Oregon. And it was created to have community members respond to crisis instead of police. They respond to low-level calls that deal with homelessness, substance use issues, and mental health crisis. And over that 30-year period, they take about 2% of their safety budget to answer about 17% of their 911 calls. And in doing so, have saved the city money at this point, $8.7 million per year. And so it's a huge opportunity that we saw in Denver to create something similar. And that's why Dasher was created in 2018 to implement this specific program. We then expanded to other work later, but this eventually led to the STAR program, which was created out of a work group that we had been part of since 2019. And the STAR program, which launched out of that work group, launched on June 1st of 2020. And what started as a small pilot program funded with $200,000 for the Caring for Denver Foundation, and served a very specific part of Denver, a very small downtown area. It pairs a paramedic from Denver Health and a mental health clinician from Mental Health Center of Denver. And again, it started with $200,000. To this point, it's funded by $4 million from the city, and it's currently expanding. We were named as a community facilitator last year, and we are now part of the advisory committee that we helped to create to be a permanent piece of this program. But it directly replaces police with clinicians, with paramedics. And for us, it's a way to decriminalize or take a carceral component out of public health issues like homelessness and like substance use and mental health crisis. We have since also launched a program in Aurora called Aurora Mobile Response Team that was approved last September and has since been launched as of this September to serve a small part of Aurora with, again, a paramedic and a clinician. We're currently working with about 14 total communities across Colorado to implement similar programs.
Thank you for sharing about STAR, Vinny. As you can see, the chat is ablaze with people that are interested in this work. I'm curious if you could tell us more about, what we saw in that video was you had 3 or 4 volunteers doing that work, but then you had a different day. You said every Sunday is different. So what's the work like been for you? And I'm really thinking about, it's about to be wintertime here in Colorado. So what do you anticipate the work's gonna be like?
Yeah, so we base all of our work out of a foundation called our Transforming Safety Wheel, which is here to kind of frame our work. I know that might be hard to see on the screen, and it kind of cuts out, I think, because of the video, but essentially we break down our work into 4 different categories on a cyclical process of transforming safety. That in the one bucket, community empowerment, includes community building, education, and employment. In another bucket includes basic human needs, which includes food security, housing security, access to healthcare. The other bucket, crisis response, which includes kind of the STAR program and the Aurora program, transforming the way that we have a city or an institution respond to crisis. And then after crisis occurs, or healing, which includes transformative restorative justice and counseling and mental health care. And so all of our work falls within one of these components. And in particular, the basic human needs part, the people that were volunteering on Sunday that volunteer with us to engage our unhoused community are all people that are volunteers. It's very, very little of our work is actually paid work, but we engage with folks, again, using street medics. Now that it's getting colder, we know that there's also going to be an increased amount of conflict in the neighborhoods where we have housed residents that will see unhoused folks try to sleep in their buildings or in their kind of apartment vestibules. That's a crisis that's happened in my own apartment building as well as others in Cap Hill. So we know not only are we going to have an increased opportunity for people to suffer from medical crises on the street, and some of which will definitely die as a result of those crises, but we'll also see an increased amount of tension. What we're doing to try to build a response for that isn't so attached to the city and to the 911 network, but more a community-based resource, is that we're implementing a dispatch tool that will allow us to find situations that occur and send our own community volunteers to respond to that. And so that is in implementation right now, or we are working on it. We are piloting a brand new program from a national group called Rahim to have our own responders address those situations in our community without using even STAR or the 911 network. But we know that that's coming at a very opportune time, as communication is a huge tool that we need to better respond to these situations.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that, Vinny. And as we transition to hear from more of our speakers, what I'm looking at right now, the transformed vision of public safety is really important, is that what you're doing is both downstream and upstream. And so those of us that are thinking about public health or public safety, one approach is not enough. Public policy is an important part, as well as taking care of the individuals who are impacted by these policies and the structures that have gotten them or impacting them while they're unhoused is important as well. So I love the cyclical nature of it and the circle of it. And I think I would love to hear more from you, Vinny, as we get to our panel discussion and our Q&A. So thank you very much for sharing that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Vitello, who's going to introduce our panel in the next part of our conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny, for sharing and for the terrific work that you're doing in our communities. I'm proud to call Vinny, Wendy, and Dr. Davis both friends and comrades in this work. I was actually working in partnership with Dasher as the community facilitator for the launch of the STAR program, the launch of the pilot, as well as the conversations related to its expansion. It's been a very successful program, one that can and should be modeled and scaled elsewhere, as we modeled and scaled it from Eugene. I'm going to introduce Wendy Talley, dear friend of mine, with whom I work closely under the CCVS initiative. She's representing the Latino Coalition, the Community Crime Victim Services Grant. She's going to talk more about that grant and the fantastic work that we're doing there. I work under the Public Health for Public Safety initiative. Again, shout out to the leadership team and Aaron Slay, Harris, who is my partner in crime at the Public Health Institute at Denver Health, doing data analysis. But I will introduce Wendy first, and then I'm going to introduce Dr. Robert Davis. Wendy Talley has worked for over 36 years in the field of social issues facing vulnerable populations, including health, poverty, housing, homelessness, incarceration, mental health, substance abuse, and wages. Wendy has over 20 years of leadership, education, transformational program design, and delivery. Currently, Wendy serves as a program manager for the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership as a lead staff person on the Community Crime Victim Services grant program funded by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. The purpose of the Community Crime Victim Services grant is to expand community-based victims support services and other interventions aimed at reducing repeat victimization for victims historically underserved or those who are unlikely to seek services, such as people of color, men, and young adults. She's going to talk more about the CCVS initiative, and then Dr. Robert Davis will follow. And I've worked with Dr. Davis on the Alternatives to Policing Task Force alongside other really dynamic champions and community activists and stakeholders from across sectors looking to find alternatives to policing as a means of solving public health and public safety issues. Dr. Robert Davis is a native of Washington, D.C. He is an ordained minister who served as a senior pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church for over 20 years before starting the nonprofit Seasoned with Grace Unboxed. Unboxed provides executive peer support groups, leadership coaching and training, especially for community organizations. Recently, Dr. Davis formed the Denver Task Force to reimagine policing and public safety, the largest community organized and community-led public safety task force in the nation. In May, the task force released a comprehensive set of 112 recommendations to transform policing and public safety in Denver, which also serves as a national model. So thank you, Vinny, Wendy, and Dr. Davis for being here. And with that, I will pass it to Wendy.
Greetings, everybody. This is my first time doing this. So it's like not seeing everybody is kind of like stressing me out. But just know that, you know, I was raised in a Baptist church where people respond and call. So this is like a little bit opposite of that experience. So if you have any kind of amens, okay, there we go. We're all here, Wendy. So I'm going to share my screen and share a little bit about the project that I work on. Okay, I didn't want to do that. See, that's what technology does. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to get it to the beginning. We did our test run and left it at that. I'll just go through it. Bear with me, everybody. All right. Let's see if I can start from the beginning. All right, so I titled this kind of what does different look like? And because the project that I've been working on is an example of what different can look like as we think about a public health response to serving people who have been experiencing victims of crime. So the name of the project I've been working on is called the Community Crime Victim Services Grant Program. And this is a project of an organization called the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership, and it was funded by the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. Let me tell you a little bit about the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership. We have a philosophy where we find, fund, form, and feature, and we're looking at community-based organizations who are normally overlooked, who are doing work in community and not getting paid, who are not usually eligible for funding. So we go to meetings, we ask who knows who, we really look and find organizations who fit that description, who are serving folks, mostly who are led by people of color. The organization was started about 17 years ago in California. So we have an office in California and an office here in Colorado and do some national work. And the founder, Richard Ramos, said, why is it that money keeps coming into our communities and none of it is getting into the hands of the community organizations that are actually doing the work? And when he asked that question,
Wendy.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if you are intending to be sharing slides right now, but I don't believe people can see them.
Oh, I am intending that. Okay, where's the little, oh my goodness, me and technology, y'all. That's why I need like a teenager in my room. How do I get?
If you hover your cursor at the top of your screen, the share screen button might pop up.
Oh no, everything's going a different direction than what I want.
Or at the bottom, depending on what kind of computer you have.
I have a PC, and what's happening is it's going through the whole like slideshow. Okay, I'm at the end of the slideshow, but how do I get it to me showing like, okay, here we go. I was jamming, y'all. All right, here we go again. Thank you. Participants can now see your application. Okay.
There we go.
Thank you so much, everybody. Technology is my friend. So I was talking a little bit about the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership and how it got founded. And so what we looked for was we found that folks needed help with evaluation. They needed help with how to manage the money that they received. They needed help with collecting data. So what the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership did is really kind of create an intermediary model that provides wraparound support to community organizations that are interested in serving their community. So we find them and then we fund them through state, local, and federal dollars, private dollars. We get money to give money, and currently are giving out roughly around $22 million as of today. And we have over 50 community partners in California and in Colorado. And then the forum piece of this is really kind of like working with the organization. We've identified 15 domains that really help create sustainable nonprofits. And so we work arm in arm with nonprofits to create a future where they're sustainable and also where they get additional resources. And then we want to feature them. So not only just getting them to the tables or being on a newsletter, we really want to get them to decision-making tables about impacts in their community. So again, that is the Find, Fund, Form, and Feature piece of the Latino Coalition. So how did we get here? So in 2017 and 2018, there was something called Victim Speaks. It was a report that communicated that the current way that folks were being served by the current existing victim services system were leaving out major chunks of people. And I like to say that if you can't speak about it, you probably can't serve it. So victim services really didn't have a language for people who caused harm and who have been harmed. And so the Victim Speaks report really interviewed over 500 folks and oversampled people of color, just asking kind of what their experience was in getting services as they had experienced being a victim of crime. That report led to HB 181409, which Jason did an amazing testimony on, along with members of the Colorado Coalition for, oh, my brain just stopped working, CCJRC. And so CCJRC really carried that legislation. That's an advocacy organization locally. And they really were able to bring together people who were impacted by crime and say, what would different look like? And what would it look like to fund community organizations? What would it look like for us to look at this through the lens of public health? And then the legislation passed. The original amount of money was $880,000. And then I wanted to add this piece in that we did something called Get Ready. And so I'm a social worker by trade. And what I witnessed is a lot of times when funders are putting out opportunities, they give folks like 20 days, 30 days to write a grant and to do all the things that grant writing requires. And so what I anticipated was, why don't we have a get ready process? And so this is actually prior to me working for the Latino Coalition. I was working as a consultant. And what I put together was a series of 8 meetings where I invited as many people as possible. And I allowed them to sit together and start talking about what does it mean to get ready for this opportunity. Folks were able to assess whether or not they were ready. Folks were able to actually meet each other. I did a speed dating activity at the Get Ready meeting where they talked about what do you need from a collaboration. A lot of people in communities of color have been very burned by collaboration. And so I really wanted them to get honest about what it would take. So that Get Ready process occurred. And then CDPHE was awarded the money from the state, and LCCL was contracted as the intermediary. Then we found community partners and we awarded those grants, and we are in year 3 of a 5-year project. So part of the intention of this project is to make sure that we have support services and interventions aimed at reducing repeat victimization. One of the things that we have found in this particular project is people of color. We've served over 700 folks in the last, since the beginning of the project. And what we're finding is over 80% have been victims of crime over 8 to 10 times. And so one of the things about that is, it's like, for me, it was like, how are people walking around? And so we really wanted to look at that particular aspect of the experience and figure out how to intervene. We saw that this was funded by to CDPHE. We are providing two things. One is a direct service response, and then the other one is something called supportive interventions. And what we really thought about was, we're in a world that sometimes people of color aren't researched or what works for them. And so we were inviting folks in our community to submit proposals that really kind of addressed what would it look like for us to have different policies, different ways of narrating the story, what would help build the field of victim services to include underserved populations. And the sunset, so this is something that's legislative. And so in Colorado, we spend about $1 billion in incarceration, and there's never a sunset review. So here with my little $1 million, they wanted me to review and see if my project is working. And we're also looking, like I said, at victims who are underserved. And mainly what I found was it's people of color, men, and young adults. And so this is the overview video of the project.
The impacts of violence are kind of like a drop, and they ripple outward. And it doesn't just impact the person who's been directly victimized, but it impacts everybody who has immediate contact with them.
The narrative has traditionally been that when it comes to victims of crime, victims of violence, our funding dollars and our intervention focus has been on one type of demographic at the expense of another. We don't typically talk about people of color or men and male youth in particular as being victims. And we have a false belief that within the criminal justice system, one is either an offender or a victim, when in actuality, the vast majority of perpetrators of violence were victims themselves long before they ever hurt anyone else. We know that hurt people, but also healed people, heal people. So how can we seize control of the narrative and provide a counter narrative toward the end of healing and violence and victimization prevention?
The motivation behind the origin of the CCBS program was really looking at what survivors need in the state of Colorado. You know, our research, what it illustrated or demonstrated was there is a significant gap in services. And so the motivation behind it was to really look at how do we provide community-based victim services for survivors who are dealing with short-term and long-term trauma from being a victim. One of the most important parts to this particular legislation, House Bill 1409, was that the funding is placed in a state agency, right, that then re-administers to a third party intermediary the funding to community. Well, that state agency is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, which is profound because historically funding usually goes to the criminal justice agencies. But we believe that we're really dealing with public health issues, especially as it relates to trauma, PTSD, that we found that a lot of survivors are dealing with. And it's really a health-related issue and not a criminal issue at that point in time, especially if it's long-term.
It's funding that in my 18 years of providing service, I have not seen. I believe it's a new movement within the state of Colorado, and it's truly what I believe that Colorado needs.
With the CCBS program, we have kind of two different portions of it. One really speaks to direct service. So we have community partners who are really entrenched within those communities, all led by people of color that are really part of the community that they're serving. They're not parachuting in. They've been part of that fabric. So they live, shop, work, worship in the same communities that they're serving. And also have lived experience. So that really speaks to being able to connect with the people that they're serving. I think the focus is really on connecting with people who've been traditionally underserved and making sure that they're getting the help and the healing that they need.
Giving the funds to those organizations that have already been doing the work, they just wasn't able to get the financial support to back them. It's been amazing to see how many lives have been changed, how many people are coming.
And then on the side of the supporting interventions, there's a lot of things that we don't know about these particular populations and why they don't access services, or what kind of services would be meaningful to them, or what are the best approaches for certain types of populations. So the supporting intervention grantees get to take a look at those types of questions to help inform what we should be doing on the ground.
The things that were really eye and heart opening for the research team, people needed other people to help them heal. People would talk about how someone in their life was kind enough. They were the opposite of violence enough to help them start to heal.
I think what's really innovative is its ability to reach communities of color. We have seen from the data in the past year that over 90% of historically underserved people have been served by this program, which is very different from data from our other victim service providers at the state level.
The success stories always identify somebody who's had a shift in their life. And they're saying by participating in our project, they are able to make a difference and ask new questions and to be an advocate for how do we get support services in community. So going from the role of being kind of a crime survivor to go into the role of being an advocate and champion for healing.
These people feel empowered, they're feeling reconnected, they're reintegrating more fully, not just in personal relationships, but social relationships, workforce, experiences, just all the way around. These are the things that are promoting like the reduction in re-victimization.
I would want people who have experienced victimization, whether it was once, twice, 8 times, to know that the CCVS program is their program. It's there for them. It's created by people who have been victimized, and they understand, and it's home.
This is the time, this is the place where these type of investments can transform what's happening in the community. And so it's important that we finally approach this holistically, and we finally approach this as something that's of value.
The impacts of violence.
So I wanted to take an opportunity. Thank you so much for giving your patience for watching the video. And I get moved every time I get to watch it. I want to talk a little bit about the people that we funded through this project. So one of the projects that got funded was Public Health for Public Safety. And we really looked at this experience as being able to finally put a voice to people who normally had not a voice and looking at this issue. And I am just so proud of the Denver Public Health for the way that they have gone about including folks with lived experiences and really honor this community engagement way that they've done research. And so this is one of the comments made that someone said, like, I'm personally been a victim of unnecessary violence while doing this work. And I believe that supporting others is the only way to success. I have found the work at CCBS valuable enough to continue even in light of my own trauma recovery. So this project is going to carry out research and disseminate that research. So that's complete now, and that report is available, and Jason would be the great contact for that information. And then the next thing we'd like to do with this information is be able to really start sharing this with all the practitioners in the victim services field. The next organization that we funded was Lifeline. And their project is called Communities with Intentions. And so part of what we're using now is the evidence-based National Acupuncture Detox Association's NADA protocols. And so ear acupuncture treatments are being done for the impacts of trauma. And it really looks at the, so you use these points in your ear that help with managing your stress and your nervous system. And what we're seeing is this is offered in a couple of spaces in our community. And what we're seeing is that folks are, who've never closed their eyes to relax, are being able to do that. We are seeing folks be ready for therapy because they have never dealt with some of the trauma from being a crime victim. One other unique thing about this project is you don't have to report being a victim of a crime. You do an attestation and you just say, at some point in my life, I was a victim of crime. And so that has been a game changer for this particular project because it really it allowed us to be looking at what are the healing modalities could we be sharing that would impact people of color. And you can see somebody made the comment that they had received treatment since April and they had been incarcerated and been out for 8 years. They go every week, but they've tried other things and nothing's changed them like this. So we are seeing really awesome results for this particular type of intervention. And the next person we funded was Kingdom Builders Family Life Center, which is located in Colorado Springs, which is south of Denver. And one of the things that we thought was men were, I think this is also too that Jason had shared over our relationship, is that men too have been experiencing being victims of domestic violence and weren't feeling comfortable going to some place to get support. And so Kingdom Builders is located at the intersection of a lot of military service folks and bases. And so the founder actually used to be a civilian that worked on the base and was really able to see that there was a gap for men. And so my Brothers and Sisters Keeper provides all those wraparound supports for folks who experience being a victim of domestic violence. So this is the other supportive intervention. And this was done by an organization called Voces Unidas for Justice. And like I said, there were 2 supportive interventions that were funded. And the name of this research project was called Finding a Healing Way. And why this was important is this is the project that focused on the repeat victimization. And so that report actually just wrapped up in June. And so we just got that, but really went into what are some of the cultural roots that we could be tapping into to help people heal from crime and victimization. And then the last but not least of my funded organizations, and this story is a really cool one. This therapist, the founder of the Therapist of Color Collaborative, came to all my Get Ready meetings, thought she would be a subcontractor for someone. She was a therapist. And then I actually asked her, I was like, well, what if you're the one, we've been waiting for? And so she pulled together a collaborative of therapists. And one of the unique things about this grant is we were allowed to fund folks who were licensed by DORA, which is the Department of Regulatory Agencies that manages the licensures for all of like therapists, people who are doing chemical addictions counseling and things of that nature. And so this was put into the legislation. And the reason why it was put into the legislation was it really was the thought that men would not go to spaces that said victim across it, but maybe they would go to an office. And so you saw in the video, one of those office spaces that's where the Therapist of Color Collaborative lives. It started off with 12 therapists, and now we are at 30 since we started. So here we go. And then I just wanted to share a little bit about what we're seeing in relationship to performance measures. So we're really looking at 4 things. We're looking at, the enrollment, and we're looking at historically underserved, and we're looking at access to services and participant feedback. And so what we have found is we have, and this is as of last quarter, we on average are over enrolled on a regular basis throughout the project. Historically underserved, as you can see in the video, we serve that population. Over 90% of the folks who are served meet that criteria. Access to services was another one of those things that folks had talked about, like I didn't get offered this or offered these things. And so we really have been paying attention to ensuring that folks were offered services and really are exceeding our goals. And then participant feedback. What we were looking for is, how much value did folks experience from this experience of and healing process? And so on average, most folks found and scored us anywhere between an 8 and a 9 and a 10 in giving feedback. And we got feedback from 85% of the folks, which was higher than we anticipated we did. And so I just wanted to close with some of the things I think are accomplishments of the CCBS project. One is, the capacity building from the Latino Coalition has resulted in each one of the direct service organizations tripling in size. So with initial investment of $200,000 and $250,000, each organization is either at $750,000 to $1 million as of today. One of the other things I think is a really great thing is a cross-project collaboration. So the communities with intention folks, we're seeing folks for NADA, and then the Therapist of Color Collaborative stationed a bilingual therapist where they were providing service. And so as people were ready, they were also to get mental health support. We also spent a lot of time on training and development, really looking at, family trauma, looking at, serving the LGBT community. We looked at also kind of how does race play into a lot of the barriers that folks experience. So we did a lot of investment with our community partners in that way. Then, as I mentioned earlier, that we were able to do 2 research projects I thought was really effective. And then leadership of color is definitely one of our accomplishments, being able to support them, being able to stand by them, and being able to help them flourish. And then also that we have people with lived experience throughout this whole particular initiative. So those are some of the accomplishments that I see. I just wanted to say thank you for listening. I added on my presentation at the end, we are the ones we've been waiting for. So Opalanga Pugh was a storyteller here in Colorado and a Denver native, and one of my closest friends, and I helped her as she transitioned from this world. And so she always used to tell me that we are the ones we've been waiting for. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Wendy. With that, we will pass to Dr. Robert Davis, and we'll be holding all questions for all presenters for the end. We'll probably have an abbreviated Q&A since we're a little bit behind schedule, but I'm sure our speakers will be happy to share their contact information for folks that have any additional comments or questions they'd like to share. Dr. Davis.
Thank you so very much, Jason. Appreciate that. Hello, my name is Robert Davis. I am the project coordinator for the Denver Task Force to Reimagine Policing and Public Safety. And the task force came about as a result of the George Floyd protest, as we began to realize that what we were dealing with here, especially as it relates to police violence, was not just policing, but public safety as a whole. And so we brought together several community outreach events, town hall meetings, where we asked a couple of simple questions to the residents of Denver. Number one, if we were to form a task force, who should be on that task force? And then the second question was, what should be considered when the task force meets? And so after gathering hundreds and hundreds of responses, we reached out to over 40 plus community organizations and asked them if they would join the task force. And we had a pretty clear directive of what we wanted to begin to explore. And so as of September of last year, the task force formed. And in May of last year, we submitted to the City of Denver, City Council, the Department of Safety, as well as the mayoral office, 112 recommendations on how we could improve public safety. The major question that we looked at was, what does public safety look like? And there are several components that we had to explore: economic empowerment, educational opportunities, quality affordable food, community street safety design, park and recreation, social/cultural cohesion, social justice, criminal enforcement reform, transportation options, access to care, robust mental health services, affordable quality housing. One of the things that Lyndon B. Johnson said in 1969, and I hope that I'm not butchering that date, but I believe it was June 19th. I know that was the correct date. I can't remember exactly what year it was, either 64 or 69. He says, we know what the issues are that cause crime and violence. And he said that it revolves around education, economic opportunity, jobs, housing, etc. And until we as a society are willing to, really address those issues, we're really going to continue to have this cycle of police violence, big awareness, then it drops off. Another case of police violence, another case of awareness, then we drop back off. So one of the first things that we decided to do was to develop a definition of what public safety looks like. So before you can come up with recommendations, you kind of have to have that framework of what public safety looks like. And here's the definition that we use. We think that this definition, as well as many of the recommendations, are transferable across the nation. And here is our definition. Public safety ensures that all members of the community decide how to organize a social environment that provides the freedom to live and thrive with the protection and support of social, physical, mental, and economic well-being. Safety is not a function of armed paramilitary forces with a proven track record of racism and violence. Public safety prevents, reduces, and heals harm. And that is what we were hoping to build from. And so the task force to reimagine public safety, again, we developed 112 recommendations, and those recommendations centered around 5 strategies. And again, these 5 strategies are applicable to any city, any municipality across the nation. Now, the 112 recommendations, of course, fall under each one of these 5 strategies. Each recommendation falls under one of these 5 strategies. And while each city would have to develop its own set of recommendations, the 5 strategies are a tremendous roadmap, if you will, to help us to think about how that looks. And I didn't mention at the beginning, while we invited over 40 plus community organizations, we also invited all the members of City Council and their aides. We invited the Department of Public Safety, the police, the sheriff, fire. We invited civil rights and social justice leaders from around the city. And when it was all combined, the task force, again, as we shared, was the largest in the nation, especially community-based, having just from the community over 80 plus community members, not including city officials and elected officials. And so what are those 5 strategies? And I really want you to just take a moment and think about these 5 strategies and to really focus on how we could implement them in whatever city you may be. I noticed that we have people from different cities here today. How this would look in a New York, how it would look in a Chicago and Atlanta, or Los Angeles, etc. And here are those 5 strategies. Number 1, empower the community with resources to adequately address socioeconomic needs and provide for their own public safety. And so we had a series of about 30 plus recommendations just to address that. Strategy number 2, minimize unnecessary interaction of law enforcement and the criminal legal system with the community. And this is so very important, especially in African-American neighborhoods and in poor marginalized communities. I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm from the Southeast community. It's the part of D.C. that you don't go to on the tour bus. But with that being said, from the time I was a child, every single interaction that I had with law enforcement was negative. I had guns pointed at my head on multiple occasions. I was called the N-word on multiple occasions. I've had violence done to me just for the crime of walking home from school. It was literally as if the police was operating like gangs. And I saw that as well when I would visit my cousins in New York City, Harlem. It was the exact same thing, just this, just this hostility toward specific communities. So how do we minimize unnecessary interactions? One of the questions I ask is this right here. When we look at the George Floyd, which is the most recent in our consciousness, was it really necessary for someone with a gun to investigate whether or not he had used a fake $20 bill? Did we really need someone with a gun to respond to that situation? And if you saw the complete video, you know that when they approached the car, the very first words out of their mouth were profanities. They were angry at him just for existing, because they didn't know if he was even the person that they were supposed to be going after for the alleged fake $20 bill. And so do we really need armed officers for all of these things? And where are they necessary? And I think we need to flip it on its head and not ask where do we remove armed officers from, but ask the invert of that, which is where is it necessary for armed officers to respond? Not what do we remove them from, but where is it necessary in the first place? And that's very important to me because of the violence that I've had directed toward me and my friends and family. Number 3, and I'll move quickly, support successful community reentry of formerly incarcerated people and remove systemic barriers to reintegration. Number 4, heal the community from harms created by policing and the criminal legal system. And then, of course, number 5, which is expand the role of community in establishing meaningful independent oversight, improving accountability, training, law enforcement, and creating public safety policy. We believe that whenever there are new policies with the police department, wherever there are new training requirements, that the community should have a voice in that actual training and in the training itself. People with lived experiences, people who live in marginalized community, people who have been victims themselves should not only recommend the type of training, but also should be involved in the training itself. And then the objective of the task force, as I close, is to develop comprehensive community-based public safety solutions. Second of all, we want to ensure that community plays a meaningful role in the development of public safety policies, training of law enforcement, as well as oversight. And number 3, provide a local and national model of community engagement and collaboration around policing and public safety. So this is the way that we're asking community members to get involved. We're asking them to reach out to the director of public safety, to reach out to the mayor, and to reach out to their city council members, and to say that they agree with the recommendations, especially the ones that they do agree with. Hey, these are the ones that we've read. We agree with these. We encourage people to support ballot measure 2G, which is one of our major recommendations, which takes the appointing of the independent monitor from the mayor and gives it to the Citizens Oversight Board, because as we know, the mayor already appoints the sheriff and the director of safety and the chief of police. So you don't want him to also appoint, or him or her to also appoint the person who's responsible for overseeing them. We want to encourage you to check out our Facebook page as well as our website. And then we ask people to say, hey, listen, looking at those recommendations, where are the gaps? What did we miss? And so we're meeting with various registered neighborhood organizations. We're having community events to ask that $1 million question, how can we do better? And then also helping neighbors to figure out ways that they can use non-911 solutions when they themselves are in conflict. So here's our contact information right here. It's denvertaskforce.org. And if there's anyone who wants to get in contact with me personally, my email address is robert@swg-unboxed.org. I'll leave it up for just a second if you need to write that down. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Vinny. We are living in yet another period in our history where our children and grandchildren, historians, are going to look back and ask, y'all did what? Literally the most powerless individuals in our communities, people with mental illness, people suffering from addiction, people who are unhoused, right? The least amount of resources, the least amount of social capital. Y'all did what? You criminalized them, you arrested them, you threw them in cages. So thank you all for being ahead of your time and on the right side of history. Amy, do we have any questions from our attendees for the panel?
We do not yet. However, if you would all share your questions in the Q&A, we could be sure to get them answered. We have this incredible opportunity to have these folks, and Vinny, if you want to share your video as well, so that any of the questions can go to any of the three of you. Or the chat's so active, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We'll find it wherever you post it.
While we're waiting on those questions, I want to add that CPHA has partnered with Dasher in releasing a press release against the further criminalization of homelessness. In particular, the utilization of public health as a means of enforcing the status quo. Vinny, do you want to say more about that, that statement and our planned press conference tomorrow afternoon?
The only thing I'll say is that across Colorado, we have over 300 policies in our largest 72 cities that criminalize homelessness. So it's not a Denver issue specifically, not a Boulder issue, Colorado Springs issue. It's an issue that impacts our entire state. And especially as folks are driven out of these cities because of criminalization, it will impact further cities in our state that aren't already impacted. And so largely these policies are created and enforced through a public health lens. And so one of our calls to action that I put in the chat was for folks who work in a public health capacity to interrogate their role in enforcing these policies and to challenge that role. And that could look a lot different depending on who's doing that.
Thank you, Vinny. Do you have particulars about the press conference, when and where, that you can share in the chat? And also, thank you, Amy. It looks like we have a question. How did you engage local police in these processes? Or did you? I'll let anyone take that question.
I'm assuming that question may be directed toward us, so I'll kick that off first. We invited the police, but we asked them to serve as advisors and consultants to the task force, because there are some specific information that they have, expertises that they possess, and insight that they also have. But what we really wanted to make sure was that the community's voice was elevated. As you well know, the mayor, the director of safety, the sheriff, the chief of police, they have a huge platform, and they have the ability and opportunity to institute various policies. So community needed to have a platform. And to be honest with you, that actually angered the director of safety, because he wanted for law enforcement to have more of a controlling role in the process. And so in January, they completely withdrew. And I think that they thought it was going to backfire, but we ended up presenting such a comprehensive and powerful set of recommendations, which is now in the chat, so you can actually download the PDF with our entire recommendations report, that they ended up having to come back to the table. The political pressure from our allies, people like Vinny and Jason and others who have been doing this work, who said, hey, no, you can't just run away from this table. They've now had to come back and begin working with us on implementation.
I can add about the STAR program. Vinny and myself and others who have been involved with the STAR program have spoken to stakeholders from across the country, even like across North America, because people are very interested in replicating what the STAR program and the Cahoots program did in Eugene before. And lack of engagement, lack of support from law enforcement has been a tremendous barrier for the STAR, for programs like STAR to even get the conversation going in certain cities. Here in Denver, Chief pays in credit where it's due. Our chief of police was very supportive and actually was a driving force of the STAR program, to the point where people on the work group, people from impacted backgrounds, people with lived experiences, and let me be clear, we had abolitionists sitting next to law enforcement at the same table, right? And our charge was to be community driven, where everyone at the table had just as much power, whether you were the chief of police or someone who was recently unhoused. And we asked law enforcement to take a step back in a more supportive role, which they did. But there's so much more there to that. That STAR could be a whole presentation unto itself. Wendy, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in one of the unique experiences of people of color that we found through my project is, and also think through the Denver Public Health for Public Safety project, is that people of color don't have anywhere to get healing when the police are the source of the violence. So if you don't have counseling, you don't have, places to heal when the police are the source of the violence. So that is a really interesting, and that's a unique experience for people of color.
Thank you, Wendy. Couple questions here for the STAR program. In addition to local police, are local developers involved? From Ray, how cooperative are the police with these new policies that deflate their egos quite a bit? Vinny, you wanna take those on?
Well, I think in terms of how cooperative law enforcement is, I think there's a differentiation to make between community responder programs like STAR and the Aurora program and CAHOOTS versus co-responder programs, which pair clinicians with police. And so in community responder programs, police are completely removed from the response. In co-responder programs, they still exist. And so the barriers that we've received is that our demands for community responder programs are then diverted into action involving expanding co-responder programs, which is not what we want. And so while police generally embrace that they are not and should not be the main response for a lot of issues, they still want to somehow be involved through co-responder programs. And that's usually the barrier that we face, is that they envision a different version of what we demand. As in terms of developers, they were not involved in the creation of STAR. However, I've mentioned that we've engaged a lot of businesses, and we've also engaged neighborhood organizations about the STAR program. So we haven't spoken directly with the developers, but with the community at large about the program.
And Vinny, if I can just piggyback a little bit off of what you just said relative to how law enforcement feels. There's two aspects of that. There's the rank and file that's actually out in the streets every day, and then there is the brass, the top brass. And it has been my experience through this process that the top brass, which has to deal with money, would like to see more money going toward their police versus some of these other alternatives. The rank and file don't want to, as Vinny just said so well, they don't want to be involved in a lot of these issues, and so they're happy to see others taking it on. So there can sometimes be that little struggle that we're beginning to notice, and that I've noticed as well.
And the thing is so many calls that law enforcement gets are related to people with mental health problems, substance use problems, people who are unhoused, problems related to poverty. Not only is it not fair to our community that is the response that we use for these problems, or the people directly impacted by these problems, it's not fair for the police either to be expected to be social workers with guns when they never signed up for that. And another question we have that I will address very quickly is, how do we, elected bodies ignore task force recommendations. And it was called out earlier that, especially for local public health people in the respective professional roles, it's difficult to speak truth to power and to hold people accountable. And that is one of the benefits of us in CPHA as a membership association. We take it very seriously to amplify the voices of people in community, those that are impacted, and as well as their advocates, to bust people in the head sometimes, including public health, governmental public health, when they allow themselves to be used as a tool to enforce the status quo. But we are at time, just about. I want to thank you all so much. Thank you. Big shout out and thanks to our panelists, Vincent Cervantes, Dr. Robert Daves, and Wendy Talley, and your respective organizations. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for our attendees for being here. If you're interested in keeping this conversation going, please let us know. Reach out to CPHA for ways to get involved. I will put my name and contact information in the chat if you're interested in learning more about CPHA or the Health Equity Coalition or how you can get involved. Amy, thank you so much to you and APHA for providing this platform for our Day of Action. So wish we could have been together in person, but
Yes.
we had up to close to 70 people. I don't know we would have had those people if we were in person. So thank you all again.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge the coalition of APHA components and also Colorado partners and our close partner, the Prevention Institute, for making this happen and all of their support for today. I hope that everyone continues to tweet and quote all these wonderful sentiments and this incredible work that was voiced so articulately by our speakers here today, and to seek all of the information that was shared in the chat, all of these links, the recommendations report, so you continue to share with your colleagues where you are and tweet and raise national attention on these issues. Robert,
right
you wanna...
on. Ray pointed out he's a member of our public health, public safety leadership team. We are looking for new members, people with lived experience from impacted communities related to violence or victimization. If you're interested in being on that team or learning more about it, reach out to me as well.
Amy, can you
Karen,
let us know?
I'm sorry, just going to say to Karen, this is being recorded. We will post this on all of our various websites and be sure to get the word out. And sorry, what was that, Robert?
You said exactly what I was going to ask. Thank you.
All right, well, with that, we conclude this year's Day of Action, and thank you to all, and have a wonderful and blessed rest of your day.